practice of designating a specific stone to a person due to the time that person was born originates within the ancient Vedic tradition. Through oral history, the Hindus passed down 9 stones assigned to 9 planets that over time traveled through the renowned Silk Road. These stones were assigned to make up for perceived weaknesses within one's birth chart, helping them as individuals meet their greatest potential, moving west and establishing not only a new direction for this information. This move secured this knowledge over the ages in what we know today as Babylonian astrology. These 9 stones that were selected to represent the planets through the Vedic tradition evolved over centuries, turning into a list of 12 stones that represent the zodiac signs, the constellation of the stars. At that time in history, the constellations were a way for people to keep up with the seasons, and around 50 BC, the Romans introduced the months, a way to divide the year up into 12 sections, approximately 30 days each. And at that time, the zodiac signs represented the months, and the stones that had represented the zodiac signs now represent the months. Around 100 AD, a man named Flavius Josephus, a respected Jewish scholar, wrote that the stones that he claims he saw in the Jewish high priest's breastplate represented not only the zodiac, but also the 12 tribes of Israel. And that's it. That's where the birthstone history stops. There's not another documented mention of birthstones for 1,600 years. So just what happened in that 1,600 years? May as well ask what didn't happen. But some of the biggest reasons we find that we may not have historical information from this period is that it was actually illegal for a common man to own or wear most of these stones that are historically listed for these years. Precious stones have been commodities from the first time they were found, financing wars, kingdoms, and used as a measure of wealth and royalty. We don't see these laws moving out of the picture until around the 1300s, and by that time, new legends were known about many of these stones, and the new legends trumped the birthstone legend. Meanwhile, throughout most of the East and Middle East, stones are still being assigned by planet placement within the birth chart, and stones in general have taken on new meanings and new properties. As the culture and customs change, so do the beliefs about stones. For instance, diamond was well known as a cure for snake bites, jaundice, leprosy, insanity, and more. It even changed colors in the presence of poison. Diamonds were well known by the Romans. They were already set into jewelry without any cut or polish in them at all. Emerald withstood the harshest of criticism. Even Pliny, who took it upon himself to expose fraudulent practices of the gem trade, had to admit that emeralds were very useful in helping ease the eyes of tiredness. Emerald has also been known to cure epilepsy, dysentery, and poisoning, and around the 1500s we see many stones taking on the properties, easing demonic influence and keeping thoughts pure. This comes from the witch trials that were occurring in many places throughout the world at that time. These stones were hope to thousands of people who feared demonic possession, as it was believed to be at that time. Ruby was known as the king of gems. It did everything. You want health, it's got it. You want wealth, it has it. You want wisdom, it brings it. Known to improve blood circulation and diminish depression, it also has a history of actually being inserted under the skin to protect warriors during battle. Ruby was another stone that took on properties of clearing the mind of impure thoughts during the witch trials of the 1500s. Sapphire is a stone that reminds us of the historic laws, keeping most individuals from being able to own or wear these stones. It was reserved for kings and high priests for most of our history. Also known to cure diseases of the eyes, colic, boils, and mental illness. Topaz was known to cure asthma, burns, poor vision, and would change color in the presence of poison. Once again, a stone that only royalty could own for much of our history. Bloodstone is one of those stones that from a very early time in history, it has been known by multiple cultures and attributed to the same thing all over the world. It stops bleeding, a very valuable stone for a warrior to have on the battlefield. It has also been touted to be an aphrodisiac, good for the circulation and a cure for blood poisoning. Garnet has been documented to have been worn into battle by King Solomon 900 years before Jesus was born to protect him during that battle. Garnets were often mixed up with rubies and sometimes intermixed with them as well, taking on many of the same properties such as curing depression and protecting one from poisoning. But the most fascinating tidbit on garnet is that in the 1800s, a group of rebels from India used them as ammunitions against the British Army, loading their bows with garnet pebbles for lack of munitions. But of course it took almost 100 years for them to win their freedom back. George Frederick Kunz, a famous gemologist and writer on stones, mentions in his book, A Curious Lore of Precious Stones, that birthstones seemed to come back into favor around the 18th century in Poland. He leaves it there, doesn't mention any special reason why it may have resurfaced. However, on the pages that follow, he strongly cautions the reader not to misinterpret the birthstone information as a commercial strategy born out of a growing jewelry industry. So just what was going on around the 18th century that would affect what we know about stones so much? Well, although India was still an independent country, one corporation, the East India Company, had an economic hold on all of India, causing interest in the Ayurvedic studies to decrease. While in Poland, the interest in mysticism increased, mainly in Kabbalah. A large community of goldsmiths had found their way into Poland after fleeing France the century before. This community not only uncovered many of the Kabbalah's hidden secrets, they were major players within the international gem trade. Not only connections with the birthstones were made by this movement, but natal stones, the foundation stones, the apostolic stones, and the angelic stones. Not to mention that the connection between the 12 tribes of Israel and the stones were once again celebrated. On top of that, a machine called the die stamp machine was actually patented for use in the 1760s and repatented for mass production in 1777. And the first jewelry store opened up in England. This is the first time in history that pre-made jewelry sat on a counter waiting for the buyers to come in and purchase. Prior to that, jewelry was made to order or purchased second-hand. The die stamp machine was the first in many patents over the next century that brought us to what we now know as the famous meeting of the National Jewelers Association in 1912. This meeting approved a standardized list for American jewelers, assigning specific stones to specific months of the year. And guess what? They're very similar to the original zodiac stones that were in place and used when Jesus was born. However, a few slight differences based on market availability. In 1952, the list was updated to include alexandrite, zircon, and citrine, and in 2002 to include tanzanite as December's birthstone. In fact, Tanzanite 1 started a marketing campaign in 2002, one that would stop all confusion about birthstones. It would eliminate them. Be born into Tanzanite is the new slogan. Beautiful legends about a local tribe and traditions that they have held onto throughout history. Tanzanite 1 is offering those of us today that are interested a special peek into history, magical tales of faraway lands, and familial connections that stand the test of time. So now when I'm asked what is my birthstone, my answer is probably not the same today as it was yesterday, and probably not the same as it will be tomorrow.